Growing up in Columbus, Ohio, I've had the pleasure of seeing our communities grow, expand, and sometimes too often be left in despair for others to buy. Today we are talking about two communities, one that remains and one that is long gone but held many memories for us to enjoy. If you are families from American Addition or the city of Townsville, please tag along for the ride with Vita and Rita as we dig deep into the trenches of the African American communities that we once came from. Merry Christmas, everybody. Merry Christmas to you. Merry Christmas to you. Merry Christmas to everyone. Gonna give you guys a couple of minutes to tag and share. Tag and share. Please add on along. I was told to start my clock. And of course, I needed a reminder. I love my friends. Thank you guys for coming along for the journey today. I am so excited to talk about today's topic. We are continuing the topic of communities, primarily African American communities that we grew up here in Columbus, Ohio. Last week I introduced to you guys my friend, my new friend, the other crazy lady that loves history just as much as I do, and that is Rita Fuller-Yates. And of course, I had to bring in a new resource to share with you so that you guys not only are aware of the problem, but have a resource to identify a way to fix the problem. And I have my niece, Yvette Caslin, with me today, who happens to live in American Addition currently. So I think it's huge that we not only address the problems and we talk about our past, but we identify a new resource that can help us evolve into the future. So I know many of you may ask, why is it that we talk about history? Why is it important for us to talk about history? I am a history major, and I never understood why it is that God allowed for me to receive a BA from Ohio University. But after learning what it is that I actually love outside of people, I really do love the idea of people coming together, connection, which actually is a community. And when we learn about the beginnings of things, we can understand what it is that we can do to be better in the process because we understand how it started. So it's important for us to understand the communities that we grew up in, how they started, because many of them are no longer here today. If you notice, if you're driving down Livingston, I think it's Livingston, and many of us are familiar with Berwick. I know many of my friends grew up in the Berwick community. Some of us are familiar with Eastgate. These communities we drive by every day, and we just drive by them. We just take them for granted just because they exist. But one day we're going to drive by them and they won't be there. And we're going to talk about a community that no longer exists, which is Townsville. But first we're going to dig deep into the history of American Addition, which was the first African American community. I have a short clip that I want to show you so that you can know how it all started. And then when you come back, Vita will be with me. And we're going to share some stories about her family who grew up in American Addition and hopefully shed some light on a new resource for you so you can learn about what American Addition is doing currently. So I'll see you guys in a minute. Growing up in Columbus, Ohio, I've had the pleasure of seeing our communities grow, expand. American Addition was once a thinly populated neighborhood surrounded by railroads and industry where people lived without central heating, bathrooms, or paved streets. The American Edition is among the oldest African American communities in Central Ohio, dating back to May 7th, 1898, when the area's 237 lots were carefully plotted. American Edition became home to the African American migrant from the South, and in some cases runaway slaves resided here. American Edition revitalized their community in 2009. The TV show Extreme Makeover rebuilt a home in the center of the community, beginning the process to a new edition of American Edition. So what do you guys think? Thanks for joining us for this conversation, Gail Barnett. Hey, Renata, thank you for joining us today. Sean Mendenhall, my old boss from the old days, thank you for joining. Hey, Nicole, thanks, boo. Mwah. Okay, for those of you that are just joining, we are talking about African American communities, the history of two primarily communities we're talking about is American Edition and Sellersville. And as I mentioned to you guys before we left, Vita has family who was raised and grew up in American Edition. And we had the honor of talking to your cousin.
Right.
And I think it was huge because he's in his 70s. Mm-hmm. But had a mind like a teenager. I mean, it was sharp.
Yeah, it was I was impressed.
He knew everything. Now, one of the things that I thought that was impressive in his conversation was how American Edition got started. Do you remember him talking about his family moving here?
Right, they migrated from, was Georgia, I do believe, because he said that his family actually had a little money. They had land and they had cotton fields. But then the boll weevil came in, a beetle, and it kind of destroyed the land, the cotton. So they had to find work, so they migrated up north, and they ended up in American Edition in that area. And then once one family got settled there, they would send and say, hey, come on up. And then everybody would just send for their family to come on up to the American Edition, and they settled there. And it was like their own little
community.
Yeah, their community with Columbus around them, but they were like in the middle kind of. So it was pretty unique.
Well, I think what out of the conversation that I heard was they were well off in the South until the
boll
weevil came.
Yes.
But what I thought was unique with that conversation was they were comfortable in the South. I mean, because we got to sometimes change this conversation that everything was downtrodden and we were just all poor and nobody ate, and we've got to change that because there obviously was exceptions, right?
Absolutely.
And that's what we like to talk about. We like to talk about the exceptions. Yes. We're going to talk today a little bit about Arthur Polk, who also was an exception. He was the first African American here that lived in Columbus, Ohio.
Yes.
In the late 1700s. So that's pretty cool all by itself. But before we talk about Arthur, let's finish talking about American Edition. For those of you that missed the beginning, my niece is joining the conversation. This is Yvette, and she actually lives in the American Edition community now. Yes. She has her own home that she built.
Yes.
And I'm so proud of her. Well, I'm just proud of you, not only because you're just fabulous,
Thank you.
but because that is huge for a single Black woman. Again, we're changing the trajectory of the story. We're not all on welfare.
No.
Right?
That's right.
That's true.
Okay, so she is an example of things changing. So let's talk more about Jimmy. Jimmy was also talking about how it was rumored that free slaves or slaves would runaway slaves would migrate to American Edition area as well.
That is true. They would migrate up there, and they knew that was a safe place because since they had their own community, they weren't answering to anyone else but themselves. So it was a safe place for the slaves.
So I think when you talk about safe is what they talked about was there was a railroad track which separated Columbus from almost the American Addition community.
Mm-hmm.
Anything on that side of the railroad track, the city of Columbus wasn't responsible for. So it wasn't until the 50s where they began even getting rid of outhouses.
Oh.
So for us, we're like, I mean, I was born in 69 and those was just a story to hear about outhouse.
Mm-hmm.
You're telling me that they had outhouses when my mom was a little girl.
Yeah.
She said that her friend, the carpet was newspaper.
Oh, wow.
Wood. They were made out of 10 shift roofs. And if you
Mhm.
notice in the documentary that we had made, they showed pictures of the homes. And they were makeshift, as your cousin had said.
Right.
I thought it was also unique. You remember the story about the honey dippers?
I never heard that.
See?
Yes. I do remember that story.
Well, let's say
And
this.
he
Let's give a prize to somebody.
Okay. Okay.
I have a prize for anyone who can explain, and we will not talk about it until the end of the show, what a honey dipper is. I love that
Oh my
story
gosh.
because there is no way you would ever think that that was what it would be
No.
called.
No. Do you
Love
remember
it.
when he said that when Columbus annexed that land, then they had to get rid of the farm animals too?
Yeah, because they brought their chickens and their
Cows,
farms
and pigs,
and
everything
with
Yeah.
them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow.
So
Well,
they were
they-
very self-sufficient. They would grow their own food and have their own produce.
Oh.
So they had to get rid of that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about being in the African American community, because that is sort of the advantage that we have, is when we do commune, we are able to be successful, especially at a time where we didn't have many resources but our own. But we create our own communities. They created their own churches in the American Addition.
There's like 2 or 3 of them over there.
They created those.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like someone migrated in and started helping them produce the structure in the community. The leaders in the community
Mm-hmm.
created that because they were separated from the city.
I believe it.
And so people just didn't get funding. So they had to self-fund themselves and voila. Well, again, I think history is cool because it has a beginning.
Yeah.
And it had a middle. The 50s was a little challenging with some outhouses. And then in the 70s, they started getting funding. And then in the 90s, something tremendous happened where the Extreme Makeover home
Oh, yeah.
was done. Was that 2000? Well,
Yeah, it was in 2000.
2009 or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not familiar with that. I
Yeah.
don't think.
The Extreme Makeover house?
Yeah.
Well,
Oh,
that,
What was that?
Oh, it's over there in the neighborhood.
yeah, don't you believe that that's really was the, and that may have been my ignorance, but that's when I started paying attention.
Yeah.
So,
So is that the TV show?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that because I don't watch
They
that
did
show.
2 houses in Columbus, and that was one of them.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
And then after they finished that house, they started building, in the process of them starting that house, they had started building a little community to support that house.
Oh.
And then your house is in the back of that, isn't it?
I'm towards the back, yeah.
Towards the back.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that house was the start. It took someone else, Hollywood, I guess, or maybe the lady, I forget the lady's name, who was the leader over American Addition.
Marie Moreland.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
They dedicated the park to her.
Well, actually, she was the lady that contacted the TV show
Okay.
in order to and then they went door to door asking people would they be interested in doing it.
Okay.
And then at that point, everybody was on board, and that's how they ended up with the house in that community. So again, we're able to make some things make a difference in our
Right.
community when somebody, it only takes one, and then the other people to support the vision. So I love that type of stuff. Now, we're not the only people who are visionaries. Arthur Polk honestly was an amazing visionary because he was the first African American to live in Franklin County. He was the servant to Lucas Sullivan.
Mm-hmm.
who also he was the caretaker to Sullivan's son. And then later in life, I understand he was buried in their cemetery, family cemetery. So he was a very important part of the family. He was raised by Lucas's wife, I think Catherine, I think is her name. But what's significant is, do you know the statue that we see right here on Scioto? It's a woman holding a baby up like this. If you ever see it, that's the significance of her holding him, the black lady. The black baby, Polk, because she took care of him because his mother abandoned him, and he was raised by them. So
I thought it was pretty amazing too, because you hear about, you know, the slave women taking care of the white babies, and they were like the wet nurse. And she had just had a baby. Lucas Sullivan's wife had just had a baby and took him in, and she nursed him along with her own baby. I thought that was pretty amazing.
So you got a black baby.
You're looking down, yeah.
Titty.
Right.
Excuse my speech. And then you had the white baby. Again, we want to tell these stories because I'm married to a white guy, and I just feel so bad when we don't talk about all the story, because it's so easy to just be like, all white people are the devils and all black people are this, you know?
Right.
But there was, we're in the talking about the Underground Railroad. There were so many white people that helped.
Yes.
So
it's amazing.
We can't just keep grouping them like that.
It's called stereotype, right?
She just told me it's called stereotype, so we have to change that story. And I think these conversations is what begins to change those stories so that we can do better. Don't you think?
I absolutely agree.
I think so too. We want to continue to take advantage of the conversation. We are going to continue to talk about our communities. Sellersville is next on the list of conversations. But before we talk about Sellersville, I wanted to make sure that we do our history right. We're given the correct information, because sometimes I study so much I may miss the detail. And this is why we include and infuse the true facts, so that you know, just in case I miss it. But please listen to this clip. This clip is about Arthur Polk, who was the first African American to live here in Columbus, Ohio. And we'll join you in a second. Arthur Polk was the first known African American pioneer born in Franklinton, 1803. He was adopted by the Sullivans and raised with their children. Arthur was taught the skill of surveying by Lucas Sullivan, the only father he knew. Being a slave, Arthur was forbidden to learn to read and write, but was taught many skills by the Sullivans. The Sullivan family lived together in Franklinton and now rest in Green Lawn Cemetery on the southwest side of Columbus, Ohio. I hope you guys are... Hey, Danny Hooks. Thank you. Thank you for joining in. Hey, Cousin Troy. Thanks for joining in. Thank you, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hopefully we're sharing some good information, something you can share with your family and friends. I wouldn't even tell them that you learned this on Facebook. Just try to act like you know it. Hey, sit down with your kids and say, you know, I was thinking about this story last night. And you can take all the credit, because the whole goal is that the next generation knows it, right? That's the whole goal. We really don't care who we learn it from.
Right.
So it's important that we talk about this stuff, because, as I said before, as you're walking or driving down Livingston and you see Berwick, we know that as an affluent African American community, but that wasn't always so, and it won't always be. Mm-hmm. So we've got to stop and recognize, because I'm sure if they was able to recognize Sellersville back in the day and knew that it would no longer be, that there would be a lot more history around it.
Yes.
When we lose history, we lose a lot of our history. Mm-hmm. Pay attention to that. When we lose history, we lose a lot of our history. Our history is where you get your confidence, in my opinion. When I'm studying this stuff, and I'm just trying to tell you how I do it. So I'll be studying and I'll be like, what? What? Oh, hell no! Yeah! Yeah, that's my girl. That's my girl. I'm a rock star. She's my neighbor. Because we take for granted that these neighbors were amazing people too, but they didn't end up in the newspaper because the media didn't cover them.
Right.
That didn't mean they wasn't great.
Right.
So that's where we're trying to change the story a little bit and make sure that we recognize everyday people, everyday communities, and everyday people trying to make a difference in their community. So we're talking about Salesville. This is more dear to your heart.
You know it.
I know it. She's been wanting to talk about Salesville for a while. So let's start with you.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about how you're connected to Salesville.
Okay. My great-grandparents actually lived in Salesville in the early 1900s. My mother had always told me that we grew up in the Grandview area, and she said we lived here or there, but no one ever talked about there being a circus with the Sales Brothers Circus, and that's why they called it Salesville. And my great-grandparents lived like in that area with the circus right around the corner from them. And I never heard anything about that. How do people not talk about the circus? That was big. There was a lot of land, a lot of animals that escaped even.
I just think that we take it for granted. When during the time and the period, it wasn't unusual for them to see animals, but it was unusual for them to see them collectively and being able to migrate down the street. So it wasn't like we see it today where you just show up at a tent and they're there. They had to transport them. And sometimes transported them required them to come through the streets. And it became more of a circus on the street before it became a circus, because then they started using the big tent. And he would use, I think Sales would use the white big tent. And I think they changed it to, I think it's called the red big tent or something now.
I'm not even familiar with the tents.
But it's some colored tent. But from my understanding, all of that originated from Salesville. That idea of what we see a circus is today was originated from the late 1800s from the Salesville, from the Sales family.
Right.
Who created it. Isn't that cool? So who else knew that there was a circus that originated here in Columbus, Ohio? Give me some thumbs up. Thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Give me some thumbs up letting me know. And if you didn't, give me some thumbs down. That will let me know what more areas of concentration we need to focus on. Because that was more late 1800s, early 1900s. And what else was very unique about the area is they had a school called Polka Dot School.
Right.
Now, why do you think they called it Polka Dot School?
Well, I know because my grandmother went to the Polka Dot School and her siblings went there. So my great aunt Vita, who I'm named after, I had a picture of her. I'm sure you're probably seeing that now. And the thing about the Polka Dot School, it was called that because it was integrated. This whole area of Salesville was integrated because all the workers that were there were needed. You couldn't say, oh, I'm not going to do business with that person because they needed that business, or that person because they needed that business, whether it was the person who trains the horses, puts the tents together, feeds the people. Even there was a mill, the some mill, I can't remember, that made the flour to feed, to make the bread to feed. It was all a very large community. Do you remember that? Do you know anything about it?
I remember it, but just it needs to be like that now when we depend on each other for things like that.
Well, I think
Absolutely.
that I remember it always being that way as a girl, but I remember it when it transitioned too. When we started going to more town and country instead of going down the street to Rosati's where your dad worked.
I remember that on Nelson.
Yeah. So we started moving out of the neighborhood, which expanded the city, and then of course blacks started moving out of more further east, I think it was, more or less, which I think that affected the inner city.
Yeah, because then we used to have like our own downtown, and like in each area we had our own stores and everything. We all support. We could walk there too, but now you have to get into your car and drive everywhere.
Well, that's what was so unique.
Except when you live downtown.
Yay! I've been trying to tell y'all about this downtown life. I'm telling you. That's actually one of the things that made me like it. It's because I grew up in a community.
Yeah.
And everything was there. I didn't have to, I don't have to drive. Yeah, I like that feeling. Where it's fit for me. Instead of it just being something for everybody. You know, it's fit specifically for me, and I love that type of stuff. So again, we have a clip, and we want to make sure you guys get the correct information regarding Townsville and when it started and how it started and where it was located. I think is really important for you to know. And then once you watch that, I want you to come back because we still want to talk to Yvette about some new resources that we have available for those that may be interested in moving into American Edition. See you in a minute. It's safe to say that you've heard of the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus. But another lesser-known circus called Columbus home more than a century ago and is forever tied to the greatest show on earth. For decades, the Sells Brothers Circus spent winters in the area of town now dominated by businesses, light industry, apartments, and fast food restaurants. From 1871 through the turn of the century, the circus's winter quarters were between West 5th and King Avenues, just west is what we now call the CSX railroad tracks, in an area that became known as Salesville. This area included an elephant house, barns for camels, monkeys, birds, and the big cat. And let's not forget the hippo pit. Pretty cool, right? I love talking about things that I didn't know. One of the interesting facts that I think started both of us on this journey of learning about the circus was the house.
Oh yes, the house on Denison and Buttles.
Yes.
That house is fabulous. And when I saw that, I was like, what is this house? And I Googled it. And so this is a picture of the house that you're probably seeing now. It's beautiful. And the unique thing about that house is in the wintertime, the Sells would take the baby elephants to the basement to let them stay in the basement of that house. So it's kind of an open concept as far as the structure. So the babies could fit and go down the steps of the house. So
And they built, and honestly, it's such a unique house.
it's beautiful.
And when you understand what it was used for, you can see how it was built just for that. On the side of the house where the animals would enter, they have a real big archway because they had to make it extra big because of the size. And then the basement, of course, they had a big corridor that they would walk through, and that's right on the side as well. I mean, I saw the house in a book. And I think we went that weekend.
Did you go? Oh, so you did go to see, isn't that beautiful?
Because I was so amazed.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah, I love history, and for it to have a story,
Yes.
I think is what's pretty
And
cool
I didn't know it was
too.
so connected to me, since my great-grandparents lived in Salesville. So I'm like,
Well, see,
I didn't
Vita
know it.
discounts herself a little bit because she doesn't know how rich her family history here is in Columbus. She had family that lived in Salesville. She had family that lived on the east side. Family that lived in American Edition. You went to a African American church, which was
Church of Christ.
Church of Christ that turned into the
Church of Christ.
famous church.
Britnell.
Britnell. That's what we really know it for.
Yeah.
Church of Christ, okay, but everybody know Britnell.
Britnell, yes.
And then last but not least, your grandparents are affiliated with Dublin. Tell us a little bit about that.
My great-grandparents, because the Tullers in Dublin, he was a big landowner up there, and he went to Kentucky and he saw my great-grandfather Jefferson Fulton, the way he worked with horses. So he said, do you want to come up to Ohio to live with me to work with my horses? And he agreed to it. So my great-grandfather and his wife were the first blacks that lived in Dublin, Ohio.
And I think one of the other things, I mean, that's huge. That's huge. I think the other thing that we need to recognize is prior to a lot the golf course,
Muirfield.
Mm-hmm. All of those areas were primarily residents of African Americans.
Yeah, they owned that land most of the time. They were the owners of the land.
So the pattern is, pay attention. If there's already a pattern from our past, that's probably the pattern they're going to use into our future. When an area goes totally down and out, you know it's going to go super high.
At some point.
Super high. They don't even go to the middle. They take it all the way to the top. So pay attention. Pay attention to how land works, because again, that's how we make our investments and make good decisions regarding real estate. Is buying low, right?
Yeah, don't let go of that property that you've had in your family for years.
Don't sell grandma's house. Don't.
Yeah, that's right.
Don't
sell it.
Don't sell grandma's house.
Don't do
Figure it out.
Go through it. Go through the process of working
Yeah,
through
let someone help you figure it out.
So we're talking about American Edition, and as I told you before, and we also talked about Townsville, but what's important is that we don't walk away just talking about how history was, but we provide a resource on what it is that the community is doing to grow in a positive light. And I have here my niece Yvette, who lives in the American Edition community, who's going to share with us some of the programs that they currently have, just in case you're interested in joining the movement.
Well, first off, the American Edition neighborhood is built through Homeport, and so they have a lot of resources. Even if you may not be ready to purchase, and that's a really nice program where some of the money that you're paying can be towards the down payment of purchasing the home that you have been renting. So they do have that program. They also have low-income housing as well. So it's definitely a good resource. One of the key things is going to a home buyer's workshop. It's free. I do know Homeport offers it. Sometimes they do charge, but then they may get a grant where it's paid for. Homes on the Hill, which is on the west side, they have a home buyer's workshop as well, and the Urban League as well. And so they can take you through all the steps and tools and resources so that you can be prepared for when it's time to purchase your home, with creating a budget, making sure your credit score is where you need it to be. You'll get different loan officers that will come in and talk about the different products and options that they have. And once you complete the course, you get a certificate which you can use towards down payment assistance on your home. So I was able to get that, which I was happy. It was $5,000. Hey.
Wow.
Yeah. So I used
great.
that towards my down payment, and then I just paid the closing costs on my own, and then I got my keys. And so I've been in my home for 2 years now.
Girl.
That's how you do it.
And I love it.
That's how you do it.
I love it, yes. And
Well, I think you went way and beyond. How did you learn about the program?
actually, I just went Googling home buyer education classes, and I wanted to see what free resources were out there, and that's how I found out about Homeport. So I went to their website to see everything that they offered, and I said, okay, this is an opportunity for me to get a brand new home. I was able to pick out different things throughout the home to make it my own special touch. And then I had you come over, and your husband helped me decorate it. So I am forever thankful for that. You do not understand. I can't thank you enough for that. But
I want to see pictures.
oh, she did that. Okay, she did it. Y'all see how she got it done.
Yeah, I know.
I'm for real. She did that. So
Thank
I
you,
am so
Niecy.
thankful for her and her husband. They came over and helped. But no, it's been a great experience, and I'm loving it. I am. My yard's not too big, so I can cut the grass myself or get it cut. So it's great. The park's back
So
there.
let me ask you a question, and I don't want to be rude to you because I know you're not our age. Is it okay for us to talk about your age?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Okay, what is your age?
I'm 32.
Okay, she is 32.
Yes, black and crack.
One of the things I noticed though, many people in your generation, and help me if I'm wrong, they don't seem to be home buyers. They don't buy homes. Is that not true,
You know
or am I
what?
doing
I would
something
say
wrong?
no, that's not true, because in the process of this, one of my good best friends, she ended up buying a home as well.
Okay.
So we kind of went through it together, which was really nice. I do have friends that contact me wanting resource information, and I give all the information that I can. If it's something that I don't know, I find out to let them know. But there are, I know for a lot of people my age, a lot of us, including myself, are at the age where we're trying to clean up things from our 20s as well. So you do want to make sure you got your finances in order and that you have a stable income, because you don't want to do this grand thing and then something happen and you lose your job. So they just want to make sure that they're prepared. I do know quite a few my age have bought homes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's a rumor.
Yeah.
Well, some of the things, that's why I like to ask.
Mhm.
And I heard just a documentary talking about home buying is down 50% than what it was even 5 years ago. So there's been a tremendous shift, and I automatically thought it was due to how young people didn't like to, they don't really like to be stuck.
Well, some of the home prices are starting to go back up too, though.
Mm.
So, maybe a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home a few years ago was maybe $125,000, and now it's probably $150,000, $160,000. So the home prices are going up in some areas too, depending on where you want to be. So all of that plays a part.
Do we know that Columbus, Ohio is a growing market?
It is growing.
So we got to recognize that a community like American Addition would be a perfect start.
Yes, it is.
To,
wonderful for that.
And I think even when you're thinking about people, when you're thinking about how a community grows, it would be great if we got the 30-somethings in there who can help grow it into its full potential.
It's definitely a family-oriented neighborhood. They have different home styles, so if you don't want a 2-story home, you can have a ranch, so you don't have to worry about any steps. So it's convenient for people of all ages, honestly.
Well, okay.
Nice.
Well, thank you, Dad. Thank you, Vita. I appreciate the conversation. Again, I appreciate being able to be a resource so that people can learn ways to improve their daily lifestyle. That's what we're here for. We talked a lot about Arthur Polk. You learned that he was our first African American. We talked about the communities of Sellersville and American Addition. Yvette Caslin was a resource, shared with us that Homeport.
Yes, Homeport
is the name of the, almost they're like a MI, is a home development.
Yep.
Home development company. You can hit them up if you're interested in learning more about American Addition. This is a great time, a great opportunity. But more importantly, we want to continue to be a resource for you to learn more about the communities, the older communities that existed in Columbus, but also sharing about people who made an impact in those communities. I think that's huge, especially as Columbus grows and as we continue to have more and more people come into our city. We need to explain our stories, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's just like the number one thing.
Yeah.
Because they'll just take over.
Yeah.
Everything that we build, especially if they're strong leaders.
Right.
Did you know that Marcus Garvey used to stay here?
I don't think I did.
I didn't know that.
Where?
Right on Mount Vernon.
Oh, wow.
He would come here all the time on different visits, and he would
Really?
stay for an extensive amount of time. And he had an office. There was a building in front of the old Carl Brown's, and his office was inside that building.
Wow, I had no idea.
And these were all information that was like from the 1900s. And there was a lady who is a historian who captured every minute almost of a day, almost, of him coming, them thinking he was a king,
Wow.
and them
really?
looking at him like, who's this big black guy driving around like a prince? Yeah.
Wow, I had no idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, what you're doing is so important in history is to stop and capture the everyday, because that is where we really learn how that life was during that moment.
Yeah.
And not stats. Right?
Exactly.
Do we get that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I'm trying to make sure that I explain the value of history. We just don't do this just to do it, and we don't do it just because we love it. We do it because we really want to add value to the conversation so that you guys can constantly improve your daily lifestyle. Nothing that we do is in vain. Everything we do is to help you improve your lifestyle and become a daily resource. My name is Rita Fuller-Yates, and I'm your homegirl and lifestyle expert. And I'll see you next time.